The job listing didn't call it a lighthouse. It called it Auxiliary Signal Station 4, Outer Approach. The pay was decent, the contract was 90 days, and the medical questionnaire was longer than the application itself. I remember sitting in the recruiter's office in Halifax, watching her highlight the line about tolerance for low-stimulus environments, and thinking that was a polite way of saying you'd be alone with your own head for 3 months. I took it because I needed the money, and because I was tired in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. My marriage had ended the way most of them do, slowly and then all at once, and I had a habit of saying yes to anything that put distance between me and the apartment we used to share. The recruiter slid a second form across the desk and told me the station ran on a 2-person rotation. My partner would be a man named Ewan, who had been doing these contracts for, she checked her notes, a long time. She didn't smile when she said it. I noticed that later. The boat out took 6 hours. The pilot was a woman in her 60s named Marjorie who ran supply runs to 3 of these stations along the coast. She didn't talk much, but when she did, she talked about the weather and the tide and never about the stations themselves. When we came around the headland and I saw the tower for the first time, I said something stupid like, "It's smaller than I thought," and she answered, "They all are." The station sat on a rock about 2 kilometers off the mainland, connected to nothing. The tower itself was concrete, painted white once, gray now. A squat building beside it housed the living quarters, the radio room, the generator shed, and a storage room full of things nobody had inventoried in years. There was no dock, only a steel ladder bolted into the rock. Marjorie held the boat steady while I climbed up with my duffel. She handed up the mail sack and a crate of food. Then she said, "Ewan knows you're coming. Don't argue with him about the log." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Just don't," and pushed off. Ewan was waiting at the top of the ladder. He was maybe 60, lean, gray, with the kind of face that had been weathered into a permanent mild expression. He shook my hand and told me where to put my bag and walked me through the station in about 15 minutes. Kitchen, bunk room, common room, radio room, log room, tower. The tower wasn't a real lighthouse anymore, he said. The lamp had been decommissioned in the 80s. What it housed now was a directional radio beacon, an automated weather sensor, and a manual relay station for vessels in the approach channel. "Our job," he said, "is to be here. The equipment runs itself. We log the traffic. We answer when called. We don't initiate contact unless required." I asked what counted as required. He said, "You'll learn the procedure." The first week was almost pleasant. The weather held. Ewan cooked, badly, and I cooked, slightly better, and we traded shifts in the radio room in 8-hour blocks. The radio room was small, lit by one overhead fluorescent that buzzed at a pitch that lived behind my back teeth, and the equipment was old, not antique, just old enough to be ugly. A console of dials and meters from the 70s, a modern digital handset bolted on like an afterthought, a wall-mounted speaker that hissed faintly even when nothing was coming through. The logbook was an actual book, hardcover, ruled, kept on a sloped wooden desk. Every transmission was recorded by hand. Time, vessel ID, message summary, response, signature. Ewan's handwriting was small and careful. Mine was worse. He told me on the first day that the log was the most important object on the station. More important than the radio, more important than the generator, more important than us. I assumed that was the kind of thing old men said to new hires to make them feel the weight of the job. The traffic was light. Fishing boats checking in. A container ship requesting a weather update. A Coast Guard cutter doing a routine sweep. Ewan handled most of it the first few days while I watched. The protocol was simple. They called us. We acknowledged. We logged it. We signed off. Standard maritime call signs. Nothing strange. The first strange thing happened on day 9, and I almost missed it. I was on the night shift. Around 2 in the morning, the speaker crackled, and a voice came through asking for a position confirmation. I picked up the handset, gave our station ID, asked the vessel to identify. Static. I ask again. Static. And then the call sign. A fishing trawler I'd already logged twice that week. The Mary Aileen. The captain's voice, which I recognized by then because he had a smoker's rasp that came through even on bad signal. He asked for a weather update. I gave it. He signed off. I logged it. When Ewan came on shift at 6, he read the log the way he always did, slowly, with his finger moving down the page. He stopped at the Mary Aileen entry. He said, "She called you at 0217. I said yes. He said, "She was tied up at Port Renfrew at 0217. I checked the harbor board last night before bed." I told him I must have misheard the call sign. He didn't argue. He just took a pencil and drew a small dot in the margin beside the entry. He didn't cross it out. He didn't correct it. He just marked it. I asked him what the dot meant. He said, "It means we'll see if it happens again." I didn't sleep well that day. The bunk room had one small window that faced the water, and the light off the water in the afternoon was the kind that made it hard to close your eyes. I lay there and tried to remember if the voice on the radio had really sounded like the Mary Eileen's captain. I thought it had. I wasn't sure anymore. On day 12, it happened twice. A container ship I'd logged the day before called in for a position check at a time when, according to its filed route, it should have been 200 nautical miles north of us. And a private yacht, registered out of Vancouver, asked for a channel handoff that didn't make sense given where they claimed to be. Both times the voices sounded right. Both times I logged the calls. Both times Ewan came on shift, read the log, and added a small pencil dot in the margin. On day 13, I asked him directly. I said, "Ewan, what are we actually doing here?" He was at the stove making tea. He didn't turn around. He said, "We're maintaining a relay station." I said, "That's not what I'm asking." He poured the water. He let the bag steep. He said, "There's a procedure. The procedure works. I'm going to walk you through it because you're going to need it. But I want you to understand something first. The procedure is not an explanation, it's a habit. The people who wrote it down are not here anymore, and the people who could have explained it are not here either. What we have is the habit. The habit keeps the station running. That's all I know, and that's all you need to know." He brought the tea to the table and sat down across from me. He said, "Starting tomorrow, when a call comes in, before you respond, you check 3 things. You check the harbor board on the secondary screen, which updates every 15 minutes. You check the AIS feed on the laptop, which shows vessel positions in our sector. And you check the call schedule, which is a printed sheet I'll give you listing the regular check-ins for the week. If a call matches all 3, you respond normally. If it doesn't match 1, you mark it. If it doesn't match 2, you delay your response by 30 seconds and ask the caller to repeat their identification." I asked what I was waiting for. He said, "For it to stop." I asked what happened if it didn't stop. He said, "It always stops. Eventually. I want to be honest about something." At that point, part of me thought Ewan was just an old man who had spent too many seasons alone on a rock and had developed his own private system for managing the boredom. I had worked with guys like that on oil platforms when I was younger. Men who had elaborate rituals about which cup they drank from on which day. You learned to humor them because the alternative was a fight that nobody had the energy for. So I humored him. I started checking the 3 sources. And the strange thing was, once I started checking, I started noticing. The mismatches weren't constant. Maybe 1 call in 15. Maybe 1 in 20. But they were there. A trawler asking for weather while AIS showed it docked. A pleasure craft requesting channel handoff while the harbor board showed it hadn't left port. A Coast Guard vessel calling in a routine sweep when no sweep was scheduled. The voices were always right. That was what got under my skin first. Not that the calls were happening, but that the voices on the calls were specific. They had accents. They had verbal tics. The Mary Aileen Captain Smoker's rasp. The Vancouver yacht owner's clipped, slightly impatient phrasing. A young woman on a research vessel who always said "thanks so much" at the end of every transmission. These weren't random voices. They were the voices of people who really called us. They were just calling at the wrong times. I asked Ewan on day 18 if he'd ever heard a voice he didn't recognize. He thought about it. He said, "Once, about 9 years ago, a voice I didn't know asking for a vessel ID match. I followed procedure. I didn't respond. It tried 3 times over about an hour, and then it stopped. I asked if he ever found out what it was. He said, I found out it stopped. That was what I needed to find out." The second strange thing started in the middle of week 3. I was on the evening shift, around 9, working through a stack of paperwork that the regional office liked us to keep updated even though nobody ever read it. The speaker hissed the way it always did. Then a voice came through, calm and clear, and said, "Auxiliary Signal Station 4. This is Auxiliary Signal Station 4, confirming relay test on channel 16, please acknowledge." I sat there with my hand on the handset and didn't pick it up. It wasn't our voice. It wasn't Ewan's, and it wasn't mine. It was a man's voice, mid-range, unaccented, the kind of voice you'd hear reading the weather on a public broadcast. But it had given our station ID, both times, and asked us to acknowledge. I checked the 3 sources. The harbor board showed nothing relevant. The AIS feed showed 2 distant vessels, neither close enough to be transmitting on our local channel. The call schedule had nothing listed for that time. I did not respond. I logged the attempt. I noted the time. I waited. About 40 minutes later, it called again. Same words, same calm tone. "Auxiliary Signal Station 4, this is Auxiliary Signal Station 4, confirming relay test on channel 16, please acknowledge." I didn't respond. When Ewan came on shift at midnight, I told him before he even read the log. He went very still in the doorway of the radio room. He asked me to play back the recording. We had a digital backup that overwrote itself every 72 hours. I queued it up. He listened to both calls with his eyes closed. When the second one ended, he opened his eyes and said, "Okay." I asked what "okay" meant. He said, "It means we're going to change the procedure for the next few nights." He told me to take the bunk and try to sleep. He'd cover the rest of the shift. He said he'd wake me if he needed me. I went to the bunk room and lay there listening to the wind against the window and the distant hum of the generator, and I didn't sleep. When I got up at 6, Ewan was at the kitchen table with a fresh logbook entry and a cup of cold tea. He told me the voice had called 4 more times during the night. Same phrasing, same tone. He hadn't responded. The 4th call had come at 5:46, and after that, nothing. He said, "Now we wait to see what it does next." I asked him, finally, what he thought it was. He looked at me for a long moment. He had very pale eyes, the kind that look almost colorless in certain light. He said, "I think it's been listening to us for a long time. I think it's been writing down our words the way we write down theirs. And I think it's getting close to running out of new words to learn." I didn't know how to respond to that. I asked if there was anyone we should call. Regional office. Coast Guard. Someone. He said, "There's a number. I've called it twice in 22 years. Both times, a woman answered and asked for my station ID and my shift code and the nature of the irregularity. Both times she said someone would look into it. Both times the irregularity stopped within a week. I never found out what she did. I never spoke to her again. I don't know if it's the same woman. I don't know if there's a woman, but the number works." He gave me the number. It was written on a laminated card kept in the desk drawer under the log. There was no agency name on the card. Just the number and the words, in small print at the bottom, "For persistent irregularities only." He said, "We're not there yet. Persistent means a pattern across multiple shifts. We log this one, we watch, and if it continues past the weekend, we call. The next 2 days were quiet in a way that felt worse than the calls. The regular traffic came in on schedule. The mismatches dropped to almost nothing. The voice didn't return. I caught myself sitting in the radio room with my hand near the handset, waiting, and not knowing whether I wanted it to call again so I could be sure I hadn't imagined it, or whether I wanted it to never call again so I could go home in 2 months and forget the whole thing. On the night of day 22, I figured out something I should have figured out earlier, and it changed how I felt about the station permanently. I was reading back through the log. Not the current book, but the previous one, which had been finished about 4 months before I arrived. I was looking for the small pencil dots, the ones Ewan made in the margin. I wanted to see how often the irregularities had been happening before I got there, partly out of curiosity, and partly because I needed to convince myself this wasn't new, that it was just the rhythm of the place. The dots were there, maybe 2 or 3 a week, spread across years of entries. Some pages had none, some had 4. The pattern was irregular but consistent. What I noticed, going back further, was that the handwriting in the log changed every few years. Different shift partners, different hands, different signatures. There was Ewan's careful small print throughout, threaded through all of it like a steady backbone, and then various other hands alongside him. A woman named Coombs in the late 90s, a man named Fallbridge in the early 2000s, a man named Harper for about 3 years after that. Each of them had eventually been replaced. I went to the storage room. There was a filing cabinet full of completed logbooks going back to the station's recommissioning in 1986. I pulled out volumes at random and flipped through them. The dots were there in every book. The other handwriting changed. Ewan's didn't. I went back to the kitchen. He was at the table, doing the crossword in a newspaper that was 3 weeks old. I said, "Ewan, how long have you been working here?" He looked up. He said, "I started in 86. I said, "You've been here for 40 years. He said, "On and off. I take leave between contracts, but yes." I asked him why. He set down the pencil. He said, "Because the procedure works better when someone who knows it is in the room. Because the station functions and people who pass through here go home. Because I came out here once when I was 32 years old after something happened to me on the mainland that I am not going to talk about, and I found that I could do this job, and that doing this job kept the thing on the other end of the radio from learning my replacement's voice too quickly. That's the whole answer." I asked what he meant by learning. He said, "I think it copies. I think when you respond to it, you give it something, a cadence, a word, a way of saying your station ID. I think across the years it has been collecting these, and I think the reason the procedure exists is to slow down the collection. We don't initiate contact, we don't respond to unscheduled calls, we delay, we mark, we let it run out of new material. The longer the same voice answers, the less new material it gets. That's why I stay. I'm boring to it, I've been boring to it for 40. I asked what would happen if it finished collecting. He picked up his pencil. He looked back down at the crossword. He said, "I don't know. The procedure doesn't say. That's the part that wasn't written down." That night, the calls started again. The first one came at 11. The same voice. "Auxiliary Signal Station 4, this is Auxiliary Signal Station 4, confirming relay test on channel 16, please acknowledge." I didn't respond. The second came at 11:40. The third at 12:15. By 2 in the morning, it had called 9 times. Ewan was awake by then, sitting in the radio room with me, his hands flat on his knees. The voice didn't change. Same words, same tone, same intervals shifting slightly each time, as if it was testing. At 2:38, the words changed. The voice said, "Auxiliary Signal Station 4, this is the Mary Eileen requesting weather update." It was the Mary Eileen captain's voice. The smoker's rasp. The exact phrasing he always used. Ewan stood up and went to the desk and took out the laminated card. He picked up the secondary line, which was a wired phone bolted to the wall, and he dialed the number. I heard him say his station ID. I heard him say his shift code. I heard him say, persistent irregularity, voice mimicry across multiple known contacts, 9 calls tonight, 26 hours of pattern. He listened for a long time. He said yes, yes, yes. Understood. He hung up. He turned to me. He said, we're going dark for 48 hours. No transmissions out, no acknowledgements in. We turn off the speaker. We let the log run blank. Someone will be at the station inside 2 days. We wait. I asked what would be at the station. He said, I don't know. I never see them arrive. I just see that they've come and gone. We turned off the speaker. We turned off the secondary monitors. We left the recording equipment running because that was part of the procedure, but we did not listen to it. We sat in the kitchen for most of the next day, and Ewan made tea, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with the station. He told me about a dog he had owned in the 80s. I told him about my marriage. The wind picked up in the afternoon and the rain came in sideways and rattled the windows for hours. And even with the speaker off, I kept thinking I heard a voice in the static of the rain, calling our station ID. On the morning of the second day, we found a sealed envelope on the kitchen table. Neither of us had heard anyone come in. The door had been locked. The envelope was plain, white, with our station number written on it in black marker. Inside was a single sheet of paper that said the irregularity had been addressed and the station could resume normal operations at noon. There was no signature. There was no agency name. There was no explanation. Ewan read it twice. He folded it. He put it in the log drawer with the other sealed envelopes, of which I now noticed there were a great many. At noon, we turned the speaker back on. The static hissed the way it always did. The fluorescent buzzed. The generator hummed. The Mary Eileen called in at 12:43 for a weather update, and her position on AIS matched, and her schedule matched, and her voice matched, and I responded normally and logged the call. Ewan read the log when his shift started, and he did not draw a dot in the margin. For the rest of my contract, the calls stayed clean. The mismatches dropped to 1 or 2 a week, well within what Ewan called background rate. The voice that had said our station ID back to us did not return. I started sleeping again, in short broken stretches, but sleeping. On my last day, Marjorie came to pick me up. I climbed down the ladder with my duffel, and she steadied the boat and I shook Ewan's hand at the top and he said, "You did fine. You followed the procedure." I said, "I still don't know what it was." He said, "Neither do I. That's the procedure too." On the boat ride back, Marjorie asked me how it had been. I told her it had been quiet. She nodded. She said, "Ewan's a good one. He'll be there until he can't be there anymore. I don't know what they'll do then." I went home. I took a different job, inland, at a logistics company. I don't work near the water anymore. I sleep most nights. My ex and I are on speaking terms now, which is more than I expected. I have a small apartment with thick curtains and a radio I don't turn on. The thing I haven't told anyone, the thing I'm telling now because I don't know what else to do with it, is this. About a year after I left the station, I was at a gas station off the highway, late at night, filling up. The pump had one of those small speakers that play advertisements at you while you stand there. The ad ended and there was a brief pause, just static, and then a man's voice, calm and clear and unaccented, said, "Auxiliary Signal Station 4, this is Auxiliary Signal Station 4, confirming relay test on channel 16, please acknowledge." I did not respond. I finished filling the tank. I got in my car. I drove home with the radio off and the windows up. I checked the gas station's website later. It's a chain. The ads are centrally programmed. I called their customer service line and asked if there had been any audio errors on the night I'd been there. The woman on the line was polite. She checked. She said there was no record of any irregularity. She asked for my name and the location and the time, and I gave them to her, and she said someone would look into it, and she thanked me for calling. That was 9 months ago. Sometimes, when I'm somewhere quiet, I notice that the background sound of the room has a faint shape to it. Not a voice, just a shape. Like something is being almost said, just under the threshold of hearing, in a cadence I recognize. It happens in elevators. It happens in empty parking garages. It happened once in the waiting room at my dentist's office, with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I follow the procedure. I check the sources I have. I delay. I don't respond. I mark the moment in my head, and I wait for it to stop. It always stops. Eventually. I don't know what Ewan is doing tonight. I don't know if he's still on the station, or if his contract finally ended, or if someone new is sitting in that small room with the buzzing light and the sloped wooden desk, learning to put pencil dots in the margin of a book that nobody outside the station will ever read. I don't know who left the envelope on our kitchen table, or what they did in the 48 hours we sat in the dark, or whether what they did was really an ending or just another delay in a pattern that started before any of us got there and will continue after all of us are gone. What I know is that the procedure works. What I know is that being boring to it is the closest thing to safety any of us have. What I know is that somewhere, on a rock 2 kilometers off a coast I will not name, a speaker is hissing in an empty room, and a logbook is open on a desk and a voice is waiting to be answered, and the only correct response is silence. I am very good at silence now. I have been